Hey everybody, welcome back to Mondays with Maximoff. We are here with the Basement Binge. Harrison has joined us again, and Rob is with me for episode 2 here of WandaVision. So, really excited about what happened in episode 1 and super looking forward to talking episode 2, spoilers and everything in between. So, welcome back to the continuation of Mondays with Maximoff, and I'll let you get started, Harrison, with let's get into that 2-minute warning of what are your thoughts on episode 2?
Yeah, it's hard to not go spoilers. It's just kind of the nature of the show. But I thought that the 2-episode release was really good. I said this in the last episode. It allowed episode 1 to kind of set up the formula, set up the environment, the way that the show was going to work, the way that the weirdness of it, the sitcominess of it. And then episode 2 just leaned more into that and just let it be without having to acclimate the audience. So there was a lot of it that was a lot lighter. It was a little more relaxed because there wasn't so much of a responsibility to provide some type of introduction. So it's weird. I watched episode 1 and immediately watched episode 2, and I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to get into the nitty gritty. Like the multiverse is going to come out in episode 2, and then it doesn't. And that's not a bad thing. It is relaxed. It's moving at a slow pace. It hints at a lot of things, which is very, very exciting. But episode 2 just lets you enjoy more of the goodness of Elizabeth Olsen, Paul Bettany, and also I'm forgetting her name, Kathryn Hahn, and just enjoy whatever's going on, whatever we're observing here in WandaVision. There's something that's abnormal, and there's these characters that are existing in this sitcom, and episode 2 was just enjoying what that meant, while still hinting at the future of what's to come. And it was simple, and it let itself be simple, and I liked it for that.
Awesome. Rob, what are your spoiler-free thoughts on episode 2?
We talked about it on the episode 1 recap. I'm definitely in agreement that it was a phenomenal idea on Disney's part to release 2 episodes back to back, especially considering they're fairly short. Some of the Mandalorian episodes were around, this episode's runtime is 36 minutes. Some of the Mandalorian episodes were kind of short, and some of them were a little bit longer than that, but to really bait the hook. Now, like us nerds, we're watching this thing every week, no matter how they release it. They could release it in 15-second segments at 2:00 in the morning, and we're going to figure out a way to watch it. But for the general public, this is the first MCU show that they're trying in this way. And it's important to get people excited for it. It's important to get people interested for it. And with what they're trying to do, I really think they needed to go back to back like this, because after that first episode, and you're not really sure what's going on, there's just a little bit of a hint there that something's not right. But certainly by the time we get to the end of this one, we know something is very not right, and it spins forward, and it really sets it in motion for what's going to happen. We're going to watch episode 3 certainly through the lens of what happened at the end of episode 2. But yes, it's more fun. We get more Vision and Wanda, and they're fantastic together. We get more Kathryn Hahn, and I just can't say how great she is in both episodes so far. Just, she is so much fun, really overdoes that character's role to the appropriate amount that should be overdone. I will say there's parts of this that kind of dragged for me. There's definitely a lot of chatter on the interwebs about maybe this show's kind of slow. There's people out there who've said they were kind of bored by the first 2 weeks, the first 2 episodes of WandaVision. And there's definitely parts, as we'll get into, of this, that there's probably about 10 minutes in this episode that really dragged in real time watching it live. On a rewatch, I just was like, oh God, when is this over? Like there's 2 scenes and they run them back to back that to me, I'd never need to see ever again.
Yeah, I still think episode 2 is good. I believe there's more, hints as to a larger picture of what's going on. So I enjoyed episode 2, but yeah, it's really hard, Harrison, like you said, to sit there and not talk about these episodes in a non-spoiler way. So what I'm going to say here is similar to episode 1. This is where we're going to get into spoilers and really break stuff down. So any listeners, if you have not watched these episodes and you don't want anything spoiled for you, pause the episode, go watch the show, and then come back and listen to the rest of it, because here's where we get started. And Harrison, I'm going to let you get started with what do you think, especially because of the fact we get another commercial where there's some hints at what's going on. I'm interested, and it's kind of jumping out of the order of the episode in which it airs, but I think this commercial really hints at Wanda's broken psyche, and that's, obviously something's really wrong here with one, the commercial being Hydra. So I'm going to let you start.
So I kind of have two. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I think that the commercials are such an interesting addition that adds such a. They're like 10 seconds, but they can mean so much, or it's just like a funny thing to do because this is a unique opportunity in the MCU, and it's just fun to do something like that, and it fits the weirdness that WandaVision is. So, like we were saying in all of episode 1, it's either extremely important or it's just there because it's fun and it fits the tone. But if it's extremely important, this is what I think about it. The first episode, we got a commercial that was about Stark Industries, kind of hinted at the past that Wanda's had with a ticking bomb from Stark Industry that would just kill their parents, and she laid next to waiting for it to explode. But also how Stark Industry allowed her to move on from her future, both with her being involved in the Avengers and the good and bad that came along with that, how Stark Industries is responsible for Ultron and the good and bad that came from that with her, and how Stark Industries is responsible for Vision and the good and bad that came from that with her. And that Stark commercial with the toaster had a very foreboding nature to it. And now we got this one. It's a Hydra watch. And the name of the watch actually is Strucker. They call it the Strucker watch. And if MCU viewers, fans of Age of Ultron, know that Strucker is the scientist who experimented on Wanda and Pietro and gave them their powers. This commercial, having a deep connection to what you would think would be a negative part of Wanda's life, was much more lighthearted. It was more uplifting, more exciting, less foreboding. Even at the end, he said, "Strucker, he'll make time for you." And it, typical commercial fashion. It really had you buy into the quality and the goodness of this watch. I just think it's so interesting. So my two ideas are a few things that are happening. Someone who's not good, bad guy, to put the simple label on it, is manipulating Wanda in some way where she's experiencing something, and they're trying to rewrite or re-influence her experiences in life and have her reevaluate what is good, what is bad, and they're doing it in very simple messaging that really takes those moments of influence and important moments in her life and kind of repositions them as a commercial. That's kind of my first theory. My second theory is that this is Wanda doing it to herself, and it is just a severely wounded, severely broken PTSD Wanda with multiverse altering powers and all the complexity that comes along with that, and how all of that is mixed up together to make these weird commercials to the point where Wanda doesn't even understand the complexity and weirdness of it, but she's experienced it because of everything that's going on in her head. And so, yeah, I thought it was very, very intriguing. But again, like I said, it could absolutely mean nothing, and it's just a fun detail. But I think that it does mean something.
Yeah, Rob, I'll let you follow up. What's your thoughts on that?
So, the watch was immediately, I recognized the name. We know who that person is. And of course, the Hydra logo, you can't help but notice it. I mean, this one was definitely not a wink. This was a outright hit you over the head kind of here, we're putting this out there. So if you think about what we saw in the commercial from episode 1, it was something Stark Industries related. It was a ticking time bomb, really. And if you think about the severe tragedies that Wanda has experienced in her life, the first one with the death of her parents was a result of Stark Industries. You think about the terrible things that happened to her with the experimentation on her and her brother, that was at the hands of Baron von Strucker. You fast forward to the next tragedy that happens in her life. It's the death of her brother. I'm kind of hypothesizing that next week's commercial in episode 3 will have something to do with his death, will somehow relate to his death. From there, could episode 4 have something to do with the death of Vision, or the breaking up of the Avengers, and then the death of Vision, and then her own death? If you think about the kinds of things that have happened in her life, and just the actual tragedy, you see, certainly when we get to the end of episode 2, when she just dismisses the idea of who this beekeeper is and what he might actually be, and just says no, which is very House of M. Like, in House of M, she just says, no more mutants, and gone. Like, it's this whole alternate world. Spider-Man's involved, that he pretends to be a mutant, but he's actually not. Like, it's actually a really great series. If for those listening have never had a chance to read it, go check it out. I recommend it. It's a lot of fun. It's kind of cool. Because it's an alternate world, they can do some stuff that's a little bit different than what we get in normal comics. So I sort of like those, but she just says no and dismisses it right away. And it rewinds back to where she and Vision are in the living room, and they're sharing this happy moment of acknowledging she's now miraculously 7 months pregnant, like out of nowhere. So it's like, I think she is in control of this. I don't really believe this is something being done to her. I think she has initiated it and is in some level of control over this reality. But you go back to, and every time something threatens that reality, it spins a decade forward. So we started in the 50s. We've moved into what we probably believe is the 60s for this episode. And then by the end of it, we're into the 70s. And every time there's a trauma, she keeps the illusion moving forward. And again, you think about everything that's happened to her. She has the death of her parents. She has probably what I would imagine is some kind of real torture to infuse her and her brother with these abilities and powers. She has this incredible grief and not really having time to deal with the fact that she had to kill Vision herself, only to have it mean nothing, because Thanos just brought him back. He just used the time stone to rewind time, brought him back just to crush his head in front of her. To have it mean her sacrifice, the terrible thing she had to do to the person she loved, ultimately meant nothing. And that was, in all of Infinity War, to me, that was probably the biggest gut punch moment of all of it, was just she made the decision to do it, and then it meant nothing. And it just, I get chills just even thinking about it. So then that happens. She gets dusted herself. And then she comes back to a world that has changed incredibly around her over the last 5 years. She fights with her teammates. She wins the day. Everybody's back. Nobody's dusted anymore. Vision's still dead. And she has to deal with that. She has to deal with all of these things. Everybody else has had the past 5 years to go to, Captain America's grief counseling circle, where they all sit around and talk about like how messed up they all are over this and support one another. And she comes back and there's no grief circle for her. Like, she just has to deal with this. And with her abilities, her powers, the things that she can do, that's why my belief is this is not being done to her. She is initiating this. And I believe that very, very strongly.
Yeah. I still have pause to wonder, though, with certain things, because, one of the things that we get, too, from this episode is a voice saying, Wanda, who's doing this to you? And I don't know how familiar the listeners are with SWORD, but basically SWORD appears to be who's monitoring this situation. And for those of you who don't know, SWORD is basically the extraterrestrial version of S.H.I.E.L.D. S.H.I.E.L.D. monitors the ground threats, and SWORD monitors the space threats. So I almost wonder if there is somebody manipulating because they're planning an attack. They want to keep Wanda out of the loop. because why would, if Wanda's doing this, if Wanda's doing this to herself, how is Sword involved? Why are they monitoring the situation? Are they trying to casually break her from this reality because they're afraid it's almost like how they say when somebody's, dreaming, you don't wake them up in their sleep because you literally could get destroyed by this person because they're not in control. So I'm wondering if they're trying to ease her along this path, but I'm very curious with Sword because one of the main characters, and again, this is just all with these episodes, you kind of have to just talk about what you think could be happening based on how it goes. But one of the key members of Sword is Hank McCoy, which again, based on casting, there's nobody that is cast that would seem like they would be Hank McCoy, but he's a huge part of Sword. And along with Evan Peters, like we talked about in episode 1, being cast in this show, that's 2 members of the X-Men that potentially could be referenced in this show, which is really exciting to me. So, kind of bouncing all over here with this episode, but Rob, you had mentioned that some of this dragged on for you. What specifically was your part that you kind of just said, didn't really work for you in this episode?
There's about 10 minutes back to back. The ladies meeting where they, the cul-de-sac ladies all get together. It's kind of cringy. It really feels out of place at times with all of the lightheartedness and some of the farcical elements we've seen so far and just the general fun when they're not trying to be, for lack of a better way, trippy or try to set the intrigue. It just felt like this woman is mean. I don't like her. I don't like her talking, and I don't like the way she's treating them, and I don't like that they're just taking it. Like, it's not a fun scene to watch. Immediately followed by kind of the men's group where they're all sitting in the library, and it's just kind of not a whole lot happens. It's kind of boring. It doesn't really serve a whole lot of purpose other than just to get the gum in him. And that part is actually really funny later when they do the animated scene that's right out of Bewitched. Like, that's really fun. But those 2 scenes back to back really slow this episode down. I also, when you get forward to when they're actually doing the magic show, which is actually really funny, really witty, and I think it really shows both the range of Wanda in her problem-solving skills, but also the range of Elizabeth Olsen. She just carries that whole scene. She and Paul Bettany together we said it before, they're so great together, and she is amazing in that series of things that are going on. But when he's doing the card trick and he goes, "Is this your card? Is this your card? Is this your card? Is this your card?" It just doesn't work. That bit just doesn't work for me. It's unnecessary, and it just feels awkward.
Harrison, what are your thoughts on that? How does this episode kind of move along for you compared to episode 1? Did you have any parts where you felt it was, dragging, or, there wasn't as much to enjoy in episode 2 as there was in episode 1 for you?
It's an interesting question to answer because I think that I kind of set myself up for a weird experience watching it. Like I said, I saw episode 1. I was like, okay, we're acclimated to this weird environment that WandaVision is and what it's going to be. Okay, let's crank it up in episode 2. And so I was just expecting like full throttle, pedal to the metal. Let's get into the multiverse madness, episode 2, which is, I'm getting ahead of myself there. So it started and it definitely wasn't. So I like immediately had to take an adjustment. Okay, that's not going to be the case. I'm going to get more of the same thing in episode 1, and then I just got into like the analytical, I'm going to dissect every moment and see what it could mean because they're not giving me the multiverse now. I'm going to think about how I could have the multiverse based off what I'm seeing here. So those moments, with the meeting at the ladies meeting, whatever that was called, that moment, I can definitely see how it would drag. And I think on rewatch, those moments would definitely drag. But I was like trying to suck out every detail of it. The introduction of Geraldine, which I can talk more about in a second, the red blood and the reintroduction of the red color, which, whoever had to rotoscope that and the helicopter, I'm so sorry for them. But that moment, the sound on the radio with what sounds like, what's his name? I forget his name. He's from Ant-Man.
Jimmy Woo.
Jimmy Woo.
Yeah, Jimmy Woo.
Hearing him, I was just, all these moments I was just sucking out all the juice from. So it was a really interesting way to watch the episode, because it was never dragging, because I was always looking for the next hint. And I think if I were to go watch it again, it would definitely drag.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way there, Harrison, that there were so many things that we discussed in episode 1 that you feel could mean something but might not. So you're just, because we don't really have a ton to go off of in the first 2 episodes, you're pulling at anything you can. It's almost like if you're, being dragged away by a river, you're going to grab a rock, you're going to grab a branch, you're going to do whatever you can to make sure you don't just keep going down the path. And this episode, like every little thing, I was sitting there going, okay, well, why is this? Why is the helicopter the same color scheme as Iron Man? Is that just a coincidence? I feel that it's not supposed to be. I feel that the color schemes have a meaning, but really, without just, Harrison, kind of like you made reference to, just hypothesizing your own theory, there's really nothing to tell you what it actually means. So I think maybe because I've already watched it once, maybe a second rewatch of the episode would maybe do the same thing that Rob's talking about. But that first watch, it was really just trying to grab at everything to go, I got to try and put some things together here, because although I'm engaged, my mind is just racing of what everything meant.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Rob, though, what, in terms of Sword and the helicopter and everything being in color, what's your theory on that? What's your theory on the importance of why it's in the same color as Iron Man's, his suit? Well, for the most part, because he had some different colors in his suits throughout the MCU, but it's the Iron Man that we know, the color scheme for that helicopter.
It's hard to think that's on accident. They're consciously making the decision to only show us certain things in color. In episode 1, it was the beeping of the toaster in red. That was the only thing we really got in color. In this one, we have the helicopter right away. It's right towards the beginning of the episode, and you can see it does not sit right with her, and then they're just kind of off. And where I really think that this is kind of self-induced on her part is Catherine Hahn's character doesn't even respond to it like it's anything. Like, they just kind of move on and they pretend like it doesn't exist. It's hard for me to believe that the color scheme was not chosen intentionally. I'd also, another Iron Man kind of wink or nod, or maybe it's something, maybe it's not. If you look at the wardrobe towards the end of their magic scene where she's supposed to appear, I kind of feel like that sort of painted on image at the very top of it, it's either like the Mind Stone kind of painted on there, or it could be Iron Man's like helmet. If you look at just sort of the outline of it. So it feels like there's continuing to be sort of Stark-like references to this. But Sword is certainly involved. It seems like they're heavily going to be trying to figure out what's going on here. For those who don't know, Sword, one of the acronyms that they use for it is Sentient Weapon Observation Response Division, which is a whole lot of words. They just wanted to use the word sword, is really what it is. Just like they wanted to use shield, they made something up to make it work for it. And Sword is Sentient Weapon Observation Response Division. Look, if you just want to call your organization Sword, you can just kind of make it up as you go along, I guess. It definitely feels as though this is perhaps an extension of the Sokovia Accords that we talked about in Civil War, and then it's briefly mentioned again in Infinity War, and certainly it's part of Ant-Man and the Wasp. But outside of that, for such a major event, it really feels like the events of the Sokovia Accords kind of disappear, and they're I don't want to say they're forgotten about, but I kind of feel like they should have had a bigger impact on the MCU as a whole, and it's hard to think that they're necessarily still in place at this point after the undoing of the snapping, and so on. But it feels like this is another offshoot, and I have no way of knowing who all's involved. We had talked about Jimmy Woo as his voice, that's saying Wanda, who's doing this to you, which again, he's the FBI agent from Ant-Man and the Wasp. So from babysitting a common criminal, he certainly got a big upgrade in responsibility. Apparently, the FBI fast-tracked him a little bit through into Sword. I'm intrigued to see what happens next, though.
Yeah, Harrison, you had mentioned that you had some thoughts on the character that you brought up. Why don't you get into those and tell us what you were thinking there
with Jimmy Woo?
Yeah, I believe you said you were going to get into that a little bit more.
Yeah, so it's actually two characters. So it's Jimmy Woo, and then the lady that Wanda meets at the ladies' meeting, the one that's really nice to her, and then is later, magically becomes part of their magic act. Her name's Geraldine. She's the one that's kind to her, and she shakes her hand, and then that mean lady kind of interrupts them. Well, so that actress, I don't even want to try and pronounce her name because I'm going to probably mispronounce it, Teyonah Parris. So she is cast as Geraldine, but also as Monica Rambeau. Monica Rambeau is the daughter of Captain Marvel's best friend. I don't know her best friend's name, but the little girl in Captain Marvel, this is like the grown-up version of her, apparently. So I've been thinking a lot about that, and also Jimmy Woo, and also S.H.I.E.L.D. And I have like a huge theory that would take a long time to explain, that like is connected to the Sokovia Accords and all those things. But the short of it is that I think that Geraldine, or more importantly, Monica Rambeau, is a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. I think that helicopter was her helicopter, that S.H.I.E.L.D., for whatever reason, is seeing that something's happening to Wanda. I think it's Wanda's own doing. But they are observing that there is a sentient weapon that is doing something that is altering the universe. And so they're observing it and responding to it, because that's what they do, to use every part of their acronym. So I think that she's a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. Sword agent. She's flying in on that helicopter. She gets too close to this pocket reality. The helicopter becomes a toy, and now Monica is now Geraldine. In the meeting, she even shakes Wanda's hand and says, "I don't know what I'm doing here." So I think that she's going to have a big involvement as a sword agent, and I think that Jimmy Woo, especially with his involvement in Ant-Man, and knowing that the third Ant-Man movie, Quantum Mania, obviously is probably going to have a lot to do with the multiverse and the involvement of that. And the 5 years that Jimmy Woo had between Infinity War and WandaVision now, there's a lot that I think that Jimmy Woo and Monica Rambeau are both involved in Sword, and part of the observation of Wanda. They're trying to respond to this super powerful weapon who, because of her own mental state, is affecting the universe. And they're trying to respond to that. And I think that they're just, one of them got sucked into the reality and is now Geraldine. The other one is on the outside trying to peer in through the radio and other things. I think it just connects to a really exciting potential that the series and the future of the MCU is going to go.
That's really that's awesome, actually. That's a pretty good theory. Kind of got me tongue-tied there for a second, but I like that, because it definitely seems like, again, these things can't be coincidences, every one of them. Now, granted, some of them can be, but there's just too much going on that everything can't be an Easter egg and just for fans. These things have to be tying to something bigger, and I believe you're probably onto something there. But
I want that to be true. I'm going on record.
I've spent so much time with this theory. There's like so many more components of it. Because like I said, I watched episode 2 and I really overdid my excitement. I was like, let's get the multiverse as fast as possible, which I don't know why I'm so excited for that. I don't really have a reason besides just being excited for it. And so then when it didn't happen and it was really like a slow burn, I just have spent way too much time especially in preparation for this episode with you, just dissecting everything and coming up with so many theories, which, you know, my track record with Mandalorian wasn't too good, but I think that I'm onto something here. Just because there's so many things that the more I thought about it, the more they connect.
Yeah, that's really good. And, you know, one thing that I'm wondering too is, and here's one of my theories, and maybe this is something that causes her to really maybe kind of crack, so to speak, is I'm wondering if Evan Peters showing up, if there's some sort of reference to, oh, you know, Pietro, he's here, and she sees him as Quicksilver, thinking that it's going to be her brother. I'm wondering if, one, it's a way to introduce the Fox X-Men universe, if they're going to bring over some of the cast. I do believe, regardless of those movies, I think a lot of those actors probably deserve to continue playing those roles. I thought they were really good, and, you know, a lot of those movies, regardless of, you know, how the movies turned out. But could that be one of the things that drives her over the edge, is seeing somebody truly from an alternate reality that she's brought into her universe, thinking, you know, I'm going to see my brother, and seeing this guy as Quicksilver just really kind of, you know, starts a path of, you know, this is where we start to think, you know, see things go really south, that she realizes that, you know, he's actually gone.
To give some more support to Harrison's theory about the helicopter being how she gets in, before she goes outside and picks up the toy helicopter, she hears the sound of a helicopter in her living room, and that's what causes her to go outside and look at it. So ultimately, I think Harrison's kind of onto something, and every week I'm going to be just texting him going, dude, you were so right, as more pieces of this start to unravel. I'd like to kind of point something out. In universe, we've seen in Captain America and Winter Soldier, we've seen Arnim Zola essentially upload his consciousness to like 2 football fields worth of reel-to-reel tape. So you can, in universe, explain somebody kind of hijacking their own sort of consciousness into something else, which when we get to, I believe it's the end of this episode, and somebody is kind of watching this as a TV show, or I think that was the end of episode 1, you know, somebody is watching this and you go, wait, how is that possible? Like, how is this? What is the explanation for that? We've seen that. It could be, that could be just the, I don't know, the energy that's given off from this sort of micro pocket universe or pocket reality that she's created. It's sending out this transmission, and that's what Sword is kind of keeping tabs on and trying to find a way to get into.
Yeah, there's just so much that, again, you just say it again, that there's so much here that you can break down and try and think of what is actually going on and what does this mean. Because, Rob, you know, I didn't even think about that really, where she hears the helicopter. So, you know, subconsciously, again, did she pull that helicopter into her reality and, you know, pull that character into her reality, like Harrison said? You know, how does, you know, does it tie in? Does it mean something? And what is the beekeeper at the end? Because it's a little similar, the outfit, to what AIM wears. That Avengers video game, you know, that was recently released. AIM is the main focus of that game. It's an eerily similar costume. But Rob, like you said, you know, she realizes right away that she does not want that person as part of her reality, and immediately just rewinds time. So, you know, what involvement does that person have? You know, how much of this is going to really, you know, hit the fan, so to speak, when she finds out that this isn't the life that she's probably going to have? This is not sustainable, so to speak.
She's going to run out of decades of TV at some point. If every time we believe that episode 1 is supposed to take place essentially in the 50s, it's implied that episode 2 is the 60s. I mean, we have Help Me Rhonda playing in the background by the Beach Boys, which was about 1965 was when that came out. And certainly the styles change, the hairstyles change slightly. Just some things look a little bit different. And then by the end of this episode, we know that we're into color. We're into the 70s. Pretty soon, she's going to be completely out of decades of TV to spin her reality forward to keep essentially escaping from these terrible traumas that she's just simply not willing to process if some of my ideas are accurate.
Yeah. Harrison, what do you think we're getting in episode 3? I think this is where some of your, theories and whatnot really come into play. And I know you said you thought episode 2 was really going to get into the multiverse, but where do you think we're headed here with these next episodes? Do you think that we're close, or is this really a slow burn season, so to speak?
I think maybe a combination of both. I think that there's going to be continual hints of a fast moving pace, but Wanda is going to continue to try and maintain a slow burn. But also at the same time, I think episode 1 and episode 2 were really used to give us some type of acclimation to what WandaVision is going to be. I think episode 3 is going to be really different. I'm kind of cheating and really looking at the cast list here on IMDb, and it's really interesting to look at these characters that I've kind of assumed are going to be a big role. Like I mentioned, Tiona Paris, who plays Geraldine, in episode 2, she's credited as Geraldine. Well, for the rest of the series, starting episode 3, she's credited as Monica Rambeau until episode 7, 8, and 9, she's credited as both. Darcy Lewis from Thor 1 and 2, her first credit is in episode 3. Jimmy Woo, his first credit is in episode 3. There's a tactical sword agent whose first credit is in episode 4. Elizabeth Olsen, her credit changes from Wanda Maximoff for episode 1 and 2 to Scarlet Witch for episode 3. So, kind of cheating here and using the advantages of IMDb. I think that there's going to be some crazy things that are going to start to happen in episode 3, and it's just going to accelerate up to episode 9 and into Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness and the rest of the MCU. I think that really WandaVision is going to be the jumping off point for the rest of phase 4 for the majority of it, if maybe even into phase 5. I think that similar to how House of M, we got the line "No More Mutants" and it created its whole spin-off universe that was a ton of fun. I think that this is going to create, instead of the "No More Mutants" line, we're going to get the multiverse. And I think that it's going to really pick up all the way up to episode 9, and it's going to get wacky. And I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, they have. There were some interviews a while back that were very clear that this show does lead directly into. At the time, we didn't know exactly what it was going to be called, but now we do know it's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And I think you're really onto something there with, we're not going to get the No More Mutants line, and Rob, you talked about this too, but the Multiverse of Madness is, to me, probably going to be dictated from Wanda just being devastated that this reality isn't real, and it really just like breaking her psyche, and it kind of like fragments into the multiverse. And I think maybe too, with all of the rumors that we're hearing, that could be a really interesting way for Chris Evans to come back as Captain America, but not exactly the Captain America that we're used to. But I think that will be stuff for some further episodes. But Rob, where do you think, based off of some of the things that Harrison said and what you're seeing, where do you think we're going here in these next couple episodes?
So I kind of like Harrison's sleuthing idea to kind of go through IMDb and see who's listed as what. However, I will say this: Marvel has specifically gone out and kind of messed with us before on purpose because they know that people are looking for stuff. So I want you to think back to when we first got trailers or anything about Avengers Endgame. And it was before, or I'm sorry, I think it was Infinity War. And those things started to come out before we got Thor 3 and Ragnarok. And at the end of which, he loses an eye and he wears the eye patch. So in Infinity War, all the promos leading up to it had Thor's eye digitally kind of fixed so that you didn't see the eye patch. And then when it came out, they changed the trailers again. At the beginning of Endgame, he kind of gets that fake eye from Rocket, and then he's got an eye for the rest of that. Or I'm sorry, I think that's in Infinity War. But all the trailers for it still have him with the eye patch in. So just little things like that, they will go out of their way to kind of trick us or lead us down a different path or kind of, not keep us guessing. So certainly you could be onto something with when those characters show up and how. But at the same time, that might just be Marvel just kind of saying, "Ha, you thought you figured it out. We got you again." I think it would be hard for us to continue down this path without seeing something from the actual reality. The 616 universe, I guess, if you want to get comic booky, and talk about the actual reality that we're concerned with. I think certainly we kind of need to see who some of these people are that are trying to find out what's going on. I would love to see more about what they think is going on, and certainly to the idea of maybe Chris Evans coming back. I kind of have a theory on the possibilities on that. We certainly thought at the end of Endgame that he was kind of done with the character. We also thought that RDJ was done with the character of Tony Stark and Iron Man. And certainly we're hearing that, I believe it. Is it confirmed, Matt? You'd probably know this better than me. It is confirmed he's in Black Widow. Or have we heard that? Is that right?
So I have read on sites that have been right for a lot of things. They made reference to Spider-Man 3 having multiple appearances from characters from past Spider-Man movies. They were really the first website that I used to find out that the Snyder Cut was officially happening. So I have read that, yes, he is officially part of Black Widow, but again, that movie is set before the events of, and now I'm not sure if that's correct, but I know it's definitely set in between, I believe, Civil War and Infinity War is when that movie's timeline takes place. So, even though it's a brief scene, I heard he's in that movie for 10 minutes. Again, it's a far cry from him being supposedly done altogether, and he felt he fulfilled his arc, so to speak. So, with a multiverse,
so I kind of want to play with that idea for a second. Yes, because we believed at the end of Endgame that Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. were kind of walking away from the Marvel Cinematic Universe and walking away from these characters. We really didn't believe that we would see them again. And now I feel kind of differently about that. And I was firmly on board believing that was the last we'd seen of them. And if we saw an Iron Man character, we saw a Captain America character, it would be played by other characters assuming that mantle. You have to look at our situation in the world right now with COVID-19 and how that's impacted theaters and how that's impacted what film studios are willing to do. Matt, you and I have talked about this before, but when theaters are eventually allowed to open back up again, how many of them are going to be left? And how many of them are going to be able to show, a small budget rom-com or, kind of a low budget horror movie that's got limited appeal? What's really going to dominate what theaters are going to be willing to show and what studios are going to be willing to invest in is going to be comic book movies. It's going to be the MCU. The MCU is going to be kind of the only real guaranteed payday for a lot of people because they know it's a hit. it's proven. You will come see it. People will definitely put down their hard-earned dollars to go sit in a theater and watch it on opening night, and not try to stream it at home like what Warner is doing with HBO Max. That is appointment viewing. You must be in the theater for it. So where I'm going with this in relation to Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr., when they walked away from those characters, they walked away from those characters in a different world. And now, yes, they're both very bankable stars, but the projects that are out there may not be as surefire as the paydays they'll get from the MCU. I think that might have some influence on whether or not we see them return to these roles in some small part or even a large part. There just might not be a lot else they really want to take a chance on. I mean, was Dr. Dolittle really any good? I didn't see it, but I heard it was kind of crap. Like what else is out there that's a guaranteed payday for them in the world that we live in today?
Yeah. So I just have to say, I can't believe you would ask if Dr. Dolittle was good. He shoves his hand up a CGI dragon's rectum to pull trumpets and bones and literally a plethora of things out of it. So yeah, the movie's fantastic. It's got all the makings of Oscar worthy, but the one thing too, Harrison, that I find interesting, you're saying how you're, looking through a couple things. 1, 2, and like The Mandalorian, you don't get episode titles for these episodes, it appears. So they're not giving anything away with these releases. There's nothing to really grasp at by the title, but also 2, episodes 1, 2, and 3 are all going to be in that 30-minute block. This is confirmed. And then after that, it has been stated that it gets out of the sitcom format and the run times do increase based on episode 4 through 9. So that's where, Harrison, I think really we could see some of these things that you're talking about, where really you start to see glimpses of the real reality and what's going on here and who's watching Wanda, what the intention is, and how far down the rabbit hole, so to speak, this really goes, because the tone of the series looks like maybe not this next episode because it still seems in line. But starting with episode 4, it really seems like where we'll get a tone shift to see what exactly we're dealing with and how it might lead into Doctor Strange.
Yeah. I think it's going to be episode 3 is going to be very similar formula to episode 1 and 2 until the very end. It's going to be like a big kind of cliffhanger, little sneak peek of what's going to happen. And then episode 4, we're falling down the rabbit hole and it's just going to keep going.
Yeah, I like too that there's no gap here in between the episodes now. Everything is now going to be week to week, which I like. And I think obviously going forward too, when we get these new shows, this is a really different venture for them, because the way that these things seem to be incorporated, Rob, you and I talked about this in our MCU review. These shows seem like they are going to be pivotal to these next phases. That if you really want to stay up to date on everything, you need to watch these, which is definitely different than anything that has come before in this massive universe that is the MCU to begin with. It's, only getting stranger and bigger.
At the time when we did the second episode of ranking the MCU, one of the questions that you had asked me about was, of the Marvel television properties, what am I most excited about? And I didn't even mention WandaVision. I'm pretty sure I didn't. Then when we did, your Matt Goes to the Mailbox episode, where we really had to do a whole show just to break down what Disney was bringing to us, and on top of the Warner announcements and things like that. But at the time when we really got to see more of what WandaVision was going to be about, my interest in this show changed dramatically between when we did the MCU Part 2, all the way to when Disney had their Investor Day release, where, hey guys, here's everything we're bringing, and we got to see more of what WandaVision was going to be. It's hard to think that there's going to be a second season of this. You know what I mean? It just doesn't seem like it's something that's sustainable as a second season, where something like Falcon and Winter Soldier probably can be. And I think we've already heard that Loki is going to be just a limited run series. This is kind of interesting that this is their first show, because it is so trippy and weird and not at all like what we've gotten. It really feels like Falcon and Winter Soldier would have been a much safer release. It seems like that would probably have been more in line with what we're used to, probably an action thriller spy type series. But if I'm not mistaken, that was intended to be the first show, but
right.
The situation with COVID-19 did change things, and it kind of bumped this up. Am I right on that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
100%. So, to me though, I'm glad, not COVID, obviously, but like,
Right.
like, hey, but no, I enjoy the fact that this actually, because of reasoning, this came first because, again, it's such a breath of fresh air, so to speak, because it is so different than anything that's come before it in the MCU, that it was nice to get this curveball. And again, like we said, though, it looks like pretty soon, though, we're all going to be thrown for a loop here and say, wow, like this is where we're going with phase 4. And even then, like we talked about, we're probably, if 15% of what we're going to guess during this recap of this show turns out to be correct, obviously I'm going to be surprised, because I just think there's so many surprises coming in store because of everything that this studio has the rights to now. There's just so many directions that everything can go. They literally have just an endless road to go in this universe.
If we get to the end of this and there's not a clear path to, okay, this is how the X-Men come in, or this is how the Fantastic Four come in, or any of these other characters, will you be disappointed?
I think I at least need to know that is the plan. For me, I mentioned this, and Harrison, I think I talked about this with you just kind of individually a little bit. The X-Men to me are going to be tricky because, unlike the MCU, and well, everything's the MCU now, but Spider-Man and Thor, Iron Man, Captain America, to me, it's going to be a little bit tricky based on the X-Men team and some of the characters to do any kind of individual movies for the X-Men the way that the MCU does them, because Cyclops is going to have his own movie where the entire world is at risk and he's powerful enough to shut that down. That's not really how it works. So I feel like the X-Men characters are going to be incorporated, as not solo acts, but team ups in individual movies or cameo appearances, so to speak. So I think it's going to be a slow burn with the X-Men. The Fantastic Four, obviously, you can do as a group setting. But I at least need to know that the X-Men are existing in this universe and maybe where they're headed, and maybe some hints at what we would get from a movie with them. I really do think that by the end of phase 4, we need to see something like that. Harrison, what are your thoughts?
I think that and I've read and listened to some interviews with Kevin Feige, the mastermind behind all this. I know that he's really not too rushed to get the X-Men back. I think that he also understands that the world, the movie-going pop culture world, needs a break from the X-Men, because of the difficulty that they have had, the negative reviews, the negative box office return. Some of those films are great, other ones are not even close. And I think also what you're saying, Matt, is a good point. The X-Men, especially with everything that's been part of the MCU and that he's been building up, the X-Men are hard to introduce. And on top of that, just logistically, I'm sure that Disney always wanted to purchase Fox, but Kevin Feige had to make a plan as if that didn't happen. His MCU plan is probably miles long, and without the X-Men, because he had no idea that he would ever have that opportunity, and now he does, and they're going to be worked in. I think it's going to be slow, but I do think that there's going to be a reveal or a little sneak of how the X-Men may be introduced. I don't think it's going to be clear like, oh, here's your hint at mutants or here's a hint at the X-Men. But I think there's going to be something that's similar to how we're doing. We're going to be able to draw a small detail and say, this is what I think is going to lead to the X-Men further down the road. I just think it's going to take a while to get there. I think we're going to get the Fantastic Four a lot more series, other things before we even get any reveal of the X-Men happening. And I think it's going to happen similar. Like, I think that going forward with MCU, there's going to be a consistent balance of limited run series movie. And I think that those characters, Moon Knight, She-Hulk, things that are going on with WandaVision, things that are going to go on with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Loki, Miss Marvel, the list goes on and on. These characters that wouldn't be good for a standalone film are going to be introduced in a limited run season or series, and later introduced into the bigger whole of the MCU. I think it's going to be, kind of like the comics, where the series that are going to be on Disney Plus are going to be like the individual stories we have of the comics. The characters' comics run, and then every few years we have that big team up. You have Civil War, you have Secret Invasion, you have Spider-Verse, you have House of M, whatever. That's going to be kind of the film's responsibility, is those big tentpole team up type nature things. And I don't think that the series are going to continually get new seasons. I think it's going to be new series, and they're just going to be limited run, which is extremely exciting. And I just trust in Kevin Feige's master plan. But I do think that the multiverse, especially for the next little while, is going to be the biggest part of that. We called phases 1, 2, and 3 the Infinity Saga. Maybe we're going to call this the Multiverse Saga or something like that. I think that the multiverse isn't just going to show up and then go away. I think it's going to show up and be a big deal for a long while, and then it's going to be resolved, similar to how in the comics they had the multiverse, and then there's that one comic where they combined like the Ultimate Universe and Earth 616. I think it's going to be similar to that, but I think it's going to be a slow burn, and then maybe after that. So I'm sorry, I've rambled on for a bit, but this is what I think is going to happen. I think we're going to get a combination of series and movies throughout the multiverse, and I think we're going to get a lot of experience with the multiverse. And after a while, the entirety of Phase 4 and a little bit into Phase 5, that multiverse is going to come to a close. And when that's happening, I think that's when the mutants and the X-Men will be introduced. I think there's going to be tons of hints and tons of seeds planted that fans like us are going to recognize as the mutants, as the X-Men, but it's not going to be a real solid thing until a while later.
Gotcha. Rob, any thoughts on that before we kind of give our overall impression of episode 2 here at WandaVision?
I think by the time we get through WandaVision and Multiverse of Madness, I would really like to at least have a sense of what this multiverse is actually going to mean. I'm not saying I necessarily want James McAvoy with a bald head rolling through a portal to be like, hey, what's going on here, everybody? Like, that's probably not what
Right.
I want. Like, we could probably all say that we don't really want that. But I would kind of, I think there's so much tension and anxiety amongst people who care about these characters, who grew up watching the cartoon of the X-Men, which still to this day I think has, all right, The Mandalorian has the greatest theme song of any TV show ever. So I'm going to backtrack on that. The X-Men cartoon from the 90s has the second greatest, theme song of any TV show ever. Grew up with that, grew up with those characters being important. Grew up, being excited that we're finally getting live action film versions of these characters. Some better than others. I think we'll just leave it at that. I think they're too important to fans. They're too important to the comic industry that I think the longer they delay it, the more anxiety we have around how they're going to do it. And the more tension it's going to have about how are they going to do it right? Or is it just going to be stupid? Like, poof, there's mutants now, everybody, like, deal with it. honestly, what I would really love to see is they figure out a way they're going to do it, and then we get like essentially what we would consider a whole season of shows, of limited run shows, with here's Cyclops, and here's him as a teenager, and here's him kind of finding out he has powers, and having some conflicts there, and eventually being recruited by Xavier, and then we have Colossus, and we have all of these other characters just having their own 5 or 6 episodes, maybe 7 or 8, of them kind of understanding what happens to them being recruited, and then we turn that into the first X-Men film. I'd love to see it, but honestly, the longer they wait to give us this, or to make a true announcement around, expect this to happen, here's the X-Men Phase 6 plan. I think we're all going to have some anxiety over it.
Yeah. Here's my thought before I get into my thoughts about this episode as a whole. One thing that I'd be super excited about for the X-Men is because they've proved that they can make it work, and you got a little bit of it towards the ending of the X-Men universe here from Fox. I am really excited to see some very, very comic book accurate X-Men costumes. I'm hoping, because they've shown that every other person can, Spider-Man, Thor, Iron Man, Captain America, they've shown that they can all work very well on screen. So I'd be really excited to see these X-Men uniforms brought to the big screen. But I also think too, Rob, where you said you'd like to see, kind of what this multiverse is. I really think too that if it's not, kind of clear by Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, I do think we're going to get more of a hint with Spider-Man 3, with everything that's being said about Spider-Man and how many characters are in there, and characters from the different the movie universes for Spider-Man. And especially, too, some of the rumors that have been swirling with Venom 2. And if you've seen the trailer for Morbius, you understand that there's already some pretty weird hints at a crossover in that movie, with Michael Keaton showing up in the trailer. There's a poster of Spider-Man in the Morbius trailer that's Sam Raimi's version of Spider-Man. Again, I don't think some of those things are just coincidences. I think they're hinting at a bigger universe here. I think Spider-Man 3 will help maybe solidify some of where this multiverse is and exactly what it means. But that's my hope, at least. But in terms of WandaVision in episode 2, I'm going to say I still thoroughly enjoyed it. I give the first one 4.5. I would give this one 4. Still very enjoyable. I like what they're doing. Super interested to see what's going on. There was slightly some of the newness of it, even though it was only episode 2, kind of wore off of, okay, I think I was expecting a little bit more of what's going on, but still a very good episode for me. Harrison, what are your overall thoughts on this episode?
I think it was simple. I think it was more set up for future payoff. And so it wasn't the most exciting thing ever. But the setup was enjoyable. And as someone who's a big fan of the comics, big fan of the MCU, it's just so much fun to be back in the MCU, to hear that title music and to be excited about what's coming. I'm excited for the payoff that's going to happen and all those great things. So yeah, I'm just looking forward to all that's going to happen, because it's just going to be lots of fun. So to answer your question, to give a more solid answer, I don't know. I'm kind of in between, where I see that, this episode wasn't the most exciting thing. I'm definitely not going to revisit it, most likely in the future, but I'm excited for what it means for what's coming.
Gotcha. Rob, your thoughts?
I kind of went back and forth between a 3.5 and a 4, because, like I mentioned, there were definitely parts of this that just dragged on for me and just kind of was like, ugh, please get through this quickly. But, I think what kind of saves it to keep it as a 4 for me is just some of the charmingness between Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany, and just how great they are together. I love her sort of solutions for what what kind of reads is Vision is kind of drunk. The gum is like chewing up his works, and he's kind of drunk, and that's sort of how they're playing it. And just her quick thinking, the way that she uses her powers to solve those solutions, is just very charming, and it's a lot of fun. And I like the little animated bit they include to pull the gum out. So there's things here to like. There's also things here that are just they can't be over fast enough. Like Harrison, this isn't an episode I'm probably ever going to rewatch unless for some reason I'm doing a complete MCU run through with everything included. So I'm going to go with a 4.
Yeah. I certainly look forward to, obviously we're going to be doing these episodes every single week. So I look forward to seeing where this show goes. And one thing that I'll leave my thought on is, Rob, you mentioned it. And it's one of the things that still has this episode rated higher is from where she was in Age of Ultron, her character, I was really annoyed with Wanda in Age of Ultron. I really still was not all that sold on her just because of her accent being, going in and out, the way that she used her powers with the weird finger twirls. And I just felt like they didn't really know how to use her. So, this show has really shown the range and how she's grown into this character, which I'm a huge fan of. So I feel like I haven't really mentioned that so far in any of the things that I've talked about, but I love where she's taken this character. I think she's really grown into it. But, Harrison, we didn't get to do this on episode 1, but I'd like to have you take a second here. Anybody that's listened to the show, obviously all of your contact information is going to be in the show notes, but, plug your show. We really appreciate you being a part of this. It's awesome that we're going to do this as a collaborative effort here, but go ahead, tell people where they can get the Basement Binge, and if there's anything you got coming down the pipeline individually, I'd love for the listeners to hear it, because you got a great show.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that opportunity, man. I'm just excited to be here on the show. Just with scheduling of the business of my life, I just knew that I wasn't going to be able to do WandaVision for my podcast. As much as I love doing The Mandalorian, I just knew I couldn't do WandaVision. So when you extended the opportunity to do it with you, everybody was like, of course, most definitely. And then watching the episode and then knowing that I was going to get on with you and Rob and talk about it, I just made me even more excited about what I was watching. So thanks for letting me be here. But if you don't know, I'm a host for The Basement Binge. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Just search The Basement Binge, or, wherever you get your podcast, you can search for The Basement Binge. If you need a website, you can go to thebasementbinge.com, or thebasementbinge.podbean.com. Download wherever you get. I appreciate it. There's reviews of the entire MCU. As I stated, the podcast started with a rewatch and re-rank of the entire MCU. It was a ton of work and it was a lot of fun. So if you're in the MCU, you can go check that out. But other than that, there's just some exciting new episodes coming. I took a little break at the beginning of the year, but I've been working on some fun, exciting episodes. So yeah, The Basement Binge, wherever you get your podcasts. And thanks again, Matt, for giving me that opportunity and for letting me be here. This has been super fun.
Yeah, it's been, it's been fun for us in the episodes that we've done, the three of us. So I know I'm super looking forward to getting through this season, not too quickly, because then, figuring out the next show that we're going to do. But Rob was, eager to have you come on too. So it's been awesome being able to do this. So we appreciate you coming on, Rob. As always, I appreciate all the help you've, been with this show for me on a personal level. There's a ton of episodes that we've done together. So really appreciate both you guys being a part of this, and to really everybody that's listening to the show. Thank you, anybody that's come over from The Basement Binge, and anybody that listens to this show. If you haven't, seriously, go check out The Basement Binge. Go check out some of Harrison's reviews. He's got reviews on some movies that I feel are sleeper hits. One of them he just did, Harrison, I'm going to plug this, was Warm Bodies. I love that movie. Love that you reviewed it, because I don't talk to a lot of people that watch that movie. So it was really cool to see that one. But he's got a lot of great content. We appreciate you listening and look forward to Mondays with Maximoff because, we certainly, Rob, if you want to plug that, because I don't want to speak for you, but I think we're all pretty excited about doing these going forward.
Pretty much. If I would say if it's on Disney Plus as a series or a show, there's a good chance we'll be here breaking it down and making sure that any of the Easter eggs that were presented or little nods or anything that's out there that you feel like, wow, it seems like there's something there. For the listeners who are not already subscribed, please make sure you subscribe because we will be here to make sure that you don't miss anything or that references that you maybe didn't catch or think are maybe a little over your level of nerdiness. We are nerdy enough to catch it for you, and we will provide it happily week after week. And we look forward to being here in your earbuds wherever you may be or in your car, whatever you might be happening to do right now while you hear the melodious sounds of our voices. We look forward to seeing you then.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We're going to catch you next week with Mondays with Maximoff. Thanks a lot.